What it we have discussed programming.
This conference will now be recorded.
So in the previous session, we have discussed about triggers, and we have discussed what exactly a trigger and what it indicates, what we can do with the help of triggers we have discussed in the previous session, and how can we create the triggers in Apex programming, what is the syntax we used to follow to prepare the triggers, and what are the various DML events that supports by Apex programming on which we can fire the triggers we have discussed, and how can we use each and every event, in what situations which event is suitable we have discussed. There we have discussed about 4 events as of now, like before insert, before update, before delete, and then after insert. These 4 events we are done. Now let's see the remaining 3 events also today. Then we'll see some more features. The next event is after update. Now tell me what this event will do. Whenever I'm creating the trigger inside my Salesforce, okay, inside my trigger, upon creating the trigger on my Salesforce object, if I'm giving the event as okay after update, then what it will do? What this event will do? This event will fire the trigger on after updating the record inside your object. So once a record has been updated inside the object, after updating the record, your trigger will get fired. So that here, this is the triggering point. So these are all are the triggering points which indicates when the trigger has to be get fired. Now, this after update event is going to be firing the trigger once the record has been updated successfully inside your object. Now, so now in this kind of situation, what kind of operations that we can do? Now let's see. Okay. Now make a note of this one. This event will fire the trigger on after updating the record. Inside the object. For example, trigger leads trigger on lead object. I'm giving the event as after update. And here we can write the business logic. Now, what kind of situations that we can do here? In this case, what we can do, once a record has been updated successfully, we can send the email notifications to the respective people. So we can send an email alert to the users. Now, and we can synchronize the parent record values into the child records. Whenever we are updating that parent record data, the same data we can reflect, we can synchronize into the related child records as well. We can update the roll-up summary field value. Once a record has been updated successfully, then roll-up summary will be getting recalculated automatically here. And once a record has been updated, we can check some conditions, and based on those conditions, we can share the record to the required people. We can share the record to the required users. And we can transfer the record ownership. We can transfer the record ownership to the required users. So these are the various operations that we can do as part of this event after update. Once the record has been updated successfully, then we can do these kind of operations. Done with this? Next, after delete event. So what do you mean by this after delete event? Then what it will do? What this event will do? This event will fire the trigger when after deleting the record from the object. Whenever we are deleting the record from the object, once the record has been deleted successfully, then it will fire the trigger. Because once the record deletion has been done, if we want to do any other operations, then we can write that piece of code as part of this trigger. So that here, this event will fire the trigger and after removing the record from the object. Okay, now, generally in what kind of situations we can go with this? Once a record deletion has been done, what we can do? No, because once a record has been deleted, if nothing is available, to whom we can send the email notification? Hmm. We can't send the email notifications. Any other operations? If the parent record has been deleted, then how can you recognize the child's? No, then how can we do that? Record has been deleted. No references, no ID, nothing. Now, in this case here, we can do only one operation. That is, once a record has been deleted successfully, then we can go back to the roll-up summary field. We can able to update the roll-up summary value. For example, I have a parent record. For that parent record, we have two childs are available. Then, on the parent record roll-up summary value will be having that value what? 2. Because we have two childs. From these two childs, one child I have deleted. Once a child record is deleted successfully, then how many childs are available still? One. So now in this case, roll up summary value, we need to update it as one. Okay, when we need to update? After deleting that, not before deletion. Before deletion, if you're updating this value, after updating that, if the record is not deleted, then it will be a problem. For that reason, once a record has been deleted, then only it will do that operation. Okay, now let's see. This event will fire the trigger this event will fire the trigger and after deleting the record from the object. For example, trigger, case trigger, or opportunity trigger. An opportunity object. Now we need to write the business logic. Now we can update roll up summary field value. The last event after and delete. Done with this? Next, the last event after and delete. What do you mean by this after and delete here? Undelete means restoring the record. When? Before restoring or after restoring? After restoring, because we are having after undelete once the record has been restored back. That means whenever we are restoring the record back to the actual object here, then it's like as a fresh insertion, right? Then in that case, once a record has been fresh inserted, again we can send the email notification. We can able to share the record to the required people. We can transfer the ownership to the required people here. We can synchronize the data to the parent record also here, child records. We can update the roll up summary field values also. We can do all these operations over here. Okay, now let's see. This event will fire the trigger and after restoring the record back to the actual object. Trigger, case trigger and case object after and delete. Write the business logic. Now we can send an email alert to the users We can synchronize the child records based on parent data, and we can share the record to the required users. We can transfer the records to the required users. We can update the roll-up summary field values. These kind of operations we can do as part of this after and delete event. So these are the various events that we have in Apex triggers. Total 7 events. So these are the total 7 events that we have on which we can fire the triggers. So please remember the triggers will not be firing based on time. Triggers are always firing based on DML events. In the interview point of view, they will try to confuse you. I want to execute the trigger based on some time. Is it possible? Say confidently, triggers can't fire based on time. If you want to fire something based on some time, then we can go for scheduling concept here. Okay, that will be the last topic over here. How to do the scheduling, that we'll see later. Okay, now. So that here triggers are always firing based on DML events. These are the total 7 events are available: before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, after undelete. These are the total 7 events on which we are going to be creating triggers. Okay, now. So now when you observe this one, some triggers are, that means some events are firing the trigger on before performing the operations. Okay, like before insert, before update, before delete. These 3 events are firing the trigger on before performing the DML operations. Remaining 4 events are firing the trigger on after performing the operation. That means that already told you in the previous session itself, triggers are having the capability to fire on before and after. Okay, now, so now here in this case, based on the situation on which the trigger is getting fired, based on the occasion. That means it will be before or after. Based on the occasion or based on the event on which the trigger is getting fired, in Apex programming, triggers has been divided into two categories. Triggers has been divided into two categories. First one, before triggers. Second one, after triggers. Okay, before triggers, after triggers. Now, so now here in this case, as part of this Apex programming, this triggers has been divided into two categories. The first one, before triggers. First one, before triggers. Second one, after triggers. Second one, after triggers. So before triggers are nothing but these are the triggers which will be getting fired on before performing the DML operation on the object records. That means whenever if the trigger has been prepared based on this before insert or before update or before delete event, then these triggers will be called as before triggers. After triggers will be always firing after performing the DML operation on the object records. So if the trigger has been fired based on okay after insert, after update, after delete, and after undelete event, then these triggers will be called as after triggers over here. So these are the two types of triggers are available. Before trigger, after trigger. Before triggers are always firing on before inserting, before performing the DML operation. After triggers are always firing on after performing the DML operations. Okay. Now these are the two categories of triggers are available. So now in this case, how can we prepare the trigger? What is a navigation? How many ways are available to prepare the triggers? In Salesforce, we have only one way is available to prepare the trigger. If it is an Apex class, we can go with the multiple ways, but triggers we have only one way. So in order to create the trigger, we have only one way, that is the developer console. Through developer console, we can create the trigger, and we don't have any other mechanisms in order to create the triggers in Salesforce. And upon creating the trigger, by default trigger will be in active status. Triggers are like as pluggable components. Whenever you want, you can plug it. If you don't want, plug it out. That means we can make it on, off. active, inactive. There is a switch. So you want to fire the trigger or you want to make it on silent mode. That we can do that. For that one here, we are having that field called as okay is it active field. So that we can able to check it out whether you want to make it active or you want to make it inactive. If the trigger is active, then it will be firing automatically based on the event. If the trigger is inactive, it won't fire. Okay, it will be on okay switch off mode. Now, in this case, by default, upon creating the trigger, trigger will be in active status, and then we can make it deactivated by using the standard navigation. Through developer console, just we can write the trigger code. We can create the trigger, we can modify, but we can't deactivate, we can't delete. If you want to deactivate the trigger, if you want to delete the trigger, we have to go to standard navigation. Okay, developer console is only to create the triggers, to modify the trigger code. And then if you want to deactivate the trigger, or if you want to reactivate the trigger, if you want to delete the trigger from your Salesforce arc, then we have to go for standard navigation. Then how to do that, we'll see over here today. Okay, now make a note of this one. Types of triggers. Now, in Apex programming, we can create one or more triggers on a single object. Based on the event or occasion on which the trigger is getting fired, triggers has been divided into two categories. First one, before triggers. Second one, after triggers. Before triggers and after triggers. Before triggers means what? These triggers will get fired on before performing the DML operations on the object records. These triggers will get fired on before performing the DML operations on the object records. For example, before insertion, before updation, before delete, like that. Second one, after triggers. These triggers will get fired and after performing the DML operations on the object records. For example, after insert, after update, after delete, after undelete. Now, we can create the triggers, we can create or modify the trigger code by using developer console as below. Click on setup menu and click on developer console link. Go to the developer console editor. Go to the developer console editor. Click on new button. Now here we can go with the file menu. Click on new. Click on Apex trigger. Enter the trigger name inside the text box and select the object name from the pick list. Click on submit button. Then it will create a trigger with the specified details. Write the required business logic inside the trigger. Save the code by using Ctrl S. So in order to deactivate these triggers, we are using this navigation. So now we can able to deactivate the trigger or we can delete the trigger by using this standard navigation over here. But through developer console, we can't do that. Creation, editing the trigger code we can do from developer console, and deactivating the trigger, reactivating the trigger, deleting the trigger, and updating the trigger code that we can do from standard navigation. So we can use the help of this standard navigation. Go to the quick find box, search for the option Apex triggers. It will list out all the triggers available inside my Salesforce org. Go to the required trigger name and click on it. The trigger code will be getting opened. Then click on edit button to make the code will be in editable state. And then we can able to unselect the checkbox is active and then make it saved, so that we can make the trigger to be deactivated from there onwards. Even though that particular event is occurred, my trigger will not get fired. Okay, trigger will be on silent mode over here. No, not required. No need to make it in deactivated here. If you want to make the changes inside the trigger, directly we can go to developer console. We can modify that code also. Done with this? Next. Now let's see the most important feature, trigger context variables. So what do you mean by this trigger context variables, and what context variables are available in Apex programming? What is the significance of each and every context variable? We'll see one by one. Now let's see. For example, I have a small requirement. Now I have a lead object, for example. I have a lead object. Now tell me, is this a standard object or custom object? Standard. Okay, lead is a standard object. Now, whenever we are creating the lead record inside the lead object, how many fields are mandatory? Three fields are mandatory. Okay, three fields. Last name, company name, and then status. Okay, status. Last name field, company name field, status field. These three fields are mandatory. Remaining all the fields are optional. Okay, now my requirement is, whenever I'm trying to be inserting the lead record inside the lead object here, whenever I'm trying to be inserting some new lead record inside the lead object, not only these three fields, I want to make industry field also required. I want to make rating field also required. I want to make phone field also required. This is my requirement. Okay. So now before inserting the record inside the object here, I would like to make sure not only the last name and the company name, lead status, along with those three, I want to make three more fields are also mandatory: industry, rating, and the phone. These three fields are also required. Okay. This is one scenario. Next, once a record has been inserted successfully, okay, once a record has been inserted successfully, after inserting the record here, after inserting the record, I want to send one email alert to the lead person. I want to send one email alert to the person over here. This is my requirement. Understood the concept here? Now, so now tell me in this case here. Now my requirement is I have a lead object. In this lead object, before inserting a new lead record, I want to make sure rating field, industry field, and the phone field should be required. And once the lead record has been inserted successfully, I want to send the email notification to the lead person's email ID with the required subject with the required content. This is my requirement. Now tell me in this case, on what object we need to create the trigger, on what events you would like to fire the trigger. Trigger should be created on what object? Lead object. Okay, fine, right. Now on what events you would like to fire the trigger? After insert. Okay. Both are single. Hmm. Hmm. When you want to fire the trigger now? On how many events you want to fire first? One event or two events?
Two
Two
events,
or
sir. Two
sure?
events, sir.
Two events? One event. What is that one event? Okay. Then in this case, okay, right. Then these validations. What about these validations? No, no. My requirement is whenever we are inserting the record, before insertion, I want to check these three fields also. And then after inserting the record, I want to send email alert. Then I want to do some operations on before insertion, some operations on after insertion. Then now tell me on how many events you want me to fire the trigger.
Two events, sir. One before insertion and one after insertion.
I want to go with triggers. I want to go with triggers. Can't we do the field required through triggers? Yes, we can do. Hmm. Okay. How many events now? Three events? Sure. Hmm. One or two. Now, what we need to do here in this case, we need to validate the data. When I want to make sure that the record should have these three values also. That means we need to do the validation. When the validation should be done on before insertion over here. Okay, one event. Then second operation, what you want to do, we need to send the email alert. When after inserting the record. That means second event. So totally we have to use two events. Okay, two events we need to use upon creating the trigger. So we need to no, not required. Page layouts are not required because we are not touching user interfaces because triggers are always executing in the background. Okay, triggers are background processes here. Okay, now in this case here we need to create a trigger on lead object which should get fired on two events. First one before insert, second one after insert, and two events I would like to fire. Before inserting that record, I would like to validate the data here. After inserting the record, I would like to send email notification. So that to do this validation, we need to write some piece of code. To send the email alert, we need to write some piece of code here. Now tell me how can we create the trigger now? Tell me how can we create the trigger? Okay. Now, trigger, lead trigger on lead object. Okay. What are the events here? Before insert, comma, after insert. Okay. Now, I want to fire my trigger on both the before insertion and after insertion the records into your lead object. Now I would like to write the piece of code. Before inserting the record inside the object, I would like to do the validation. So write the code for the validation. That is make rating, industry and phone fields required. This is one thing. Second one here, write the code to send the email alert to lead person. We need to write this a piece of code over here. So, okay, both these events related code we are writing within the trigger over here. So now here in this case, we are writing the code related to the validation. We are writing this code related to send the email alert. Both the code we are going to be writing within the single trigger over here. Now, so now here this code when you want to execute before insertion or after insertion, before insertion. This code when you want to execute after insertion here. Now, fine. So now here in this case here, now I'm trying to be inserting a record in my lead object. Now I'm trying to be inserting the lead record into my lead object. So before inserting the lead record, this event will be getting fired here. Now my event will be firing my trigger. Trigger will execute. When the trigger is executing here, whatever the business logic we have written, whole business logic will be executed. Now tell me, really you want to execute the whole business logic on before insertion? No. Then what logic you want to execute? I want to execute only this validations related code on before insertion. Now this email notification code I want to execute it on after insertion here. So in this case, how to inform to the trigger, boss, don't execute the whole code on before insert event. Please execute this piece of code on before insertion, this piece of code on after insertion. How to inform to the trigger? How can we inform? In order to inform to the trigger, we need to know the current status of the trigger. We need to know whether trigger has been fired or not. If the trigger is fired, then why the trigger is fired? Because of which DML operation trigger is fired? Because of insertion, because of updation, because of deletion, because of undeletion, when? Because of why trigger has been fired. Suppose if the trigger is fired because of insertion, then what the trigger is doing right now? It is about to insert, it is already done. I want to check it out. That means I need the exact status of the trigger. Based on the exact status, I can indicate which piece of code has to be executed over here. Okay. So for that reason here, we need to check these conditions also. We need to check the exact status of the trigger. Based on the exact status, we can identify, we can perform the required operations over there. Understood the concept over here? Now, let's see. For example, here. Come to a small scenario. For example, we are having the session by 5 o'clock. We are having the session at 5 p.m. So now daily will be starting by 5:15. Okay, 5:15 we are starting the session, or 5:20 we are starting the session. So now in this meantime, people are keep on posting the message here. Okay, session is started or not, session is started or not, session is started or not. Now somebody is giving the reply, not yet started, not yet started. That means what? The people are checking the current status of our session. Session is started or not. Now, if somebody posting the message, session is not yet started, then the people will take some time. Okay, still session is not started because so that we can join after 5 minutes. Suppose if somebody posted the message, session is started, then immediately they will be joining that. That means what? Based on the current status, they can take some decision whether they can join right now or we can join after a few minutes over here. We can take the decision. Like the similar way here also, we need to know the current status of the trigger over here. Based on the current status, we can able to check it out whether we can execute this piece of code or this piece of code over here. So in order to know the current status of the trigger, we are using trigger context variables. Context means current status. Okay, context means current status. We would like to collect the current status of the trigger. Based on the current status of the trigger, we can able to segregate the trigger code into separate small units. So now we can indicate which piece of code has to be executed on what event, that we can decide with the help of trigger context variables over here. Now, as part of your Apex programming, we have 12 trigger context variables are available. Apex provides 12 trigger context variables are available. What are those 12 trigger context variables? What is the purpose of each context variable? How to use them? How to validate them? How to write that piece of code to execute? Okay, this piece of code should be executed on what event? This piece of code should be executed on what event? How to inform to the trigger? We'll see practically here. Okay, now let's see what are those context variables are available. Let me explain. Now, make a note of this one. Trigger context variables. We use variables, we can identify current status of the trigger. We can identify the current status of the trigger so that we can execute the associated business logic based on the event. By using context variables, we can divide the trigger code to various smaller units based on the event. Now, Apex provides the below 12 trigger context variables. Apex provides the below 12 trigger context variables. First one, Boolean trigger dot is insert. Second one, Boolean trigger dot is update. Third one, Boolean trigger dot is delete. Fourth one, Boolean trigger dot is delete. Fifth one, Boolean trigger dot is before. Sixth one, Boolean trigger dot is after. Seventh one, Boolean trigger dot is executing. Eighth one, trigger operation trigger dot operation type. Ninth one, trigger dot new. 10th one, trigger dot new map. 11th one, trigger dot old. 12th one, trigger dot old map. These are the 12 trigger context variables are available in Apex programming. Done with this? Now, the first one. So, what exactly it indicates? Trigger dot is insert. That means what? What? What did you understood with this? Trigger is trigger is fired because of insert operation or not. Okay. Now, so now in this case here, then what we are doing with these context variables, we are checking the current status. Okay, now, so now I would like to check whether trigger is really fired because of insert operation or update operation, delete operation or what? I would like to know. So that here we are using these context variables. Trigger dot is insert is a context variable which is used to check whether my trigger is fired because of insert operation or not. If the trigger is fired because of insert operation, it returns true or else it returns false. These are all our Boolean parameters over here. Okay, up to the first six one, these are purely Boolean type here. Almost seven, we are having Boolean type. But these are returning true or false. Now that means that we are checking session is started or not here. Like that here, we are checking that trigger is fired because of insert or not over here. That's it. Is it before or after? We have some more context variables here. Is before, is after here. We are having that. Okay. Now, so now here in this case, trigger dot is insert. Okay, trigger dot is insert here. Now, it returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an insert operation. Else, it returns false. Else, it returns false. If the trigger has been fired because of an insert operation, it returns true, else it returns false. Now tell me, similar fashion. Second one is what? Trigger dot is update. That means what? To check whether trigger is fired because of update operation or not. If the trigger is fired because of update operation, it returns true or else it returns false. It returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an update operation. Else it returns false. Third one. Trigger dot is delete. That means what? Right. If the trigger has been fired because of delete operation, then it returns true, or else it returns false. It returns true if the trigger has been fired because of a delete operation. Else it returns false. Trigger dot is and delete. Now it returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an undelete operation. Else it returns false. Is before. That means what? If the trigger is about to perform the operation, trigger is filed because of insert or update or delete, whatever, trigger is filed. What the trigger is doing, it is about to do the operation. In that case, we are using this context variable is before. That means it is going to start. Okay, session is going to start or not. Yes, it will be any one of these operations here, not all at a time. Okay, anyone, not all. Because an operation can be only one, either insertion or updation, deletion. Now all the operation we can't do it at a time, right? Hmm. Any one of this operation, right? So once the trigger is fired, it will be performing the operation. Now it is about to perform the operation or operation is already done. I want to check. For that one, two more context variable here. It returns true if the trigger is about to perform the operations. Else it returns false. Now it returns true if the trigger is already done with the operations. Else it returns false. Next, trigger dot is executing. That means if the trigger is currently performing the operations, it returns true or else it returns false. It returns true if the trigger is currently performing the operations. Else it returns false. Sorry? Now, internally here, internal, whenever the trigger is about to perform, we'll stop that here, we'll check the condition based on that, we can do certain operations. Okay, we are writing the logic inside that, we are not stopping directly here. We can't monitor that, internally it will be stopping that. With the help of the logic itself, we are stopping. That's what here, that's what the trigger will do. Trigger is going to be performing the operation. That before firing, before performing the operation, we are going to be stopping the trigger. We are going to be performing certain operations over there. That's what we are checking these conditions. Okay. Whatever the records you are trying to insert, whatever the records you are trying to update, those records were stopping with the help of this trigger itself. We are firing the trigger, we are doing certain operations inside. Okay. Done with this code. Now, so these are the 7 context variables here. How to use these context variables to segregate this a piece of code, we'll see in next session. In the next session, we'll see how can we execute this piece of code only on before insertion, how to execute this piece of code on after insertion. We'll see on Monday. Okay, Monday will be having the continuation of these features. So now by Monday we'll complete the theoretical concepts over here. We are having 4 more context variables, and then along with that we have a feature called as trigger bulkification. Then we'll see that, and then after that we'll see the practical concepts. Okay, thank you.